ReefDudes is sponsored by Ecotech Marine and Bulk Reef Supply. Today we're going to check out the Radion High Intensity Lens Kit. What's going on, guys? Devin from ReefDudes. So today we're checking out the high intensity or the narrow lens kit from Ecotech. It kind of takes it back to a little bit how some of the prior generations were. So if you look at the current, the G5s and G6s, they have, up to about 120 degrees of spread. So it's a very wide angle of light, which has a lot of benefits for coral. If you're wrapping light, a big fuzzy blanket of light all around the corals, it's going to prevent shadowing. It's going to promote better health on the undersides of the coral. Now there's a couple downsides to that. Obviously you get a little more light spill when you're spreading the light out so much. Again, you might have a little more algae on the glass because you're getting a lot of reflection. So I mean, it is better for the coral, but there may be scenarios where you don't want that. I know one of the biggest kind of probably consumers of this is going to be someone with like a coral farm. If your lights are very high above the tank, you want to concentrate that into more of a narrow lens. So with these guys, it takes that 120, 105 degrees and brings it back down to about 67 to 77 degrees. So you're taking that light and you're condensing it down like that. So that is going to give you a lot more power and a lot more punch at the cost of a bit of spread. So for doing this, a couple other kind of advantages that come to mind is if you're getting 70–80% more power out of your light from focusing it, you can run your lights at a lower percentage. So maybe you're running your lights at 90% now, you might be running it at say 60 later to have the same level of power. So that's some of the stuff we're going to test out. Now one of my main things I want to try out is to see how much light spill I can cut down on. Mainly just for like, the toddler going around and keep the light over his eyes. I did build these little magnetic light shades that made a pretty big difference. But again, if I can just put the light below it rather than going out the side, that's a good win, right? Especially if you can use a little less power. So let's get these installed and try them out. Unplug the end light and we will get this one off down. I did put a piece of cardboard down just in case so I don't lose any screws. We do have our lens kit. So this will be the narrow lens. There is some clear ones in the middle as well. Most of them are frosted except for some of the clear ones. So this will add a little bit more shimmer to the tank. Instruction guide, 2 different Allen keys, a bag of little screws and washers. The chin is fairly straightforward. We're going to start by removing the 4 screws around the bezel. And once we do that, we can carefully move this to the side. And now we're going to remove all the screws holding the lens down. Once you're done, you can take off the lens and we got our LED circuit board underneath. So it looks like there's 2 different versions on here. One of them does need extra washers and one does not. It looks like I have the smaller hole one, so I don't think I need them. So we should just be able to pop our lenses on, which makes it nice and easy to install the new lens kit. Of course, we'll line it up, make sure all our holes are lined up. And each lens should be over a diode. And now we can reinstall our screws. Now, of course, you don't want to over tighten these, just loosely do them by hand. And just snug it up. Now I do have 5 XR30s on my tank, so I think I'm going to install the narrow lens kit on the 2 on this side, then we'll do a bit of a comparison going down the tank and see how it compares with the wide angle lens half of the tank versus the narrow lens half of the tank. That'll be kind of a good feel for how much of a boost in power it does. And last but not least, reinstall your bezel. Carefully don't pitch the power wire in the edge as you reinstall it. And of course, tighten up your bezel screws and you are good to go. Look at that nastiness. Definitely overdue for a good dusting, and let that be a good reminder to you guys to periodically dust your lights off. Let your lights breathe, make them quieter. Definitely worth doing a little periodic maintenance on that front. Now, as a bit of a comparison to see side by side, if you're ever picking them up used, you're not sure which lenses they have, really easy to tell. If you take a look at these, they're much smaller. If you look at these, they're much like the HEI lenses, like the big spheres on top of them. You got the clear lenses all around the middle. So really easy to tell which lenses you have just by looking at them. And again, little tiny bumps for the lenses versus the big spheres. So super easy way to tell. All right, so these 2 lights have been changed to the narrow lens kit. These 3 are still the wide, and I'm going to go across with the par kit just kind of see at the tank's current state how much a difference there is from one end to the other. So at roughly right below this light, I am getting about 750 par directly below it. Same thing, if I go directly under this one, we're getting around 800. If I go under the high intensity, we're getting 1200. So definitely a decent jump. If I come all the way down here, down to the sand bed, we're getting about 440. If I go down to the sand bed, mainly under the wide one, we're getting around 235. All right, if I go right upon this acro directly below, we're getting around 700. If I go over here below the high intensity, now I'm getting about 1200. So it is a fairly substantial jump in the par. So I am gonna pop my light shades back on and just see the difference. Might be hard to tell because it's still half and half, but. All right guys, looking from one end to the tank, kind of look at the caustics, the shimmering in the sand bed. You can see some, but again, it's not super duper crazy. We come over to this side of the tank. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely more, but it's not drastically. It's very subtle. I wouldn't say there's a massive difference on that front. I know, kind of curious on camera. Do you notice much of a difference between the left hand and the right hand side? I mean, looking at the wall for the light spill, it's definitely a little bit brighter on the right than the left, but again, not massive. So we got 2 down. Let's do the other 3, kind of a comparison. I'm gonna do one more quick par test just so I can pick a spot in the tank and kind of match it afterwards, because I definitely have to lower my lights down a bit. Now it is gonna be important to be able to match rough intensities kind of later in the day. And if I click onto the higher intensity part of my day, one of the peak parts, kind of my quote unquote cooking the coral parts, currently it's getting 650 par at that point of the day, right in this little nook of the coral. So I'm gonna swap the rest of them, and then we'll kind of play with the overall schedule and see how it brings us back to where it is now. Now about halfway through, I know this is totally a placebo, just because this half is brighter because there's more light concentrated downwards, but the corals do look more vibrant over here. But again, I do know it's just because they're getting more light and a little more punch versus this half, which are dimming. But yeah, it's kind of fun little placebo as you're installing them. So 3 down, 2 to go. All 5 installed. Before we were at 650, and now I'm about 850, 860. So I jumped about 200 par in the spot that's kind of between the 2 lights at that same high intensity part. So I'm gonna drop her down a bit. Okay, so I dropped it from 80 to 65%. Now I'm about 740. All right, now I dropped it down to 55%. Now we're getting around 600 par, and I believe, was it 550 or 650 out earlier? Either way, 600 is still plenty of par, and we went from 80 down to 55%. So I shaved off 25% of the power on it. So that's a pretty decent increase. So I mean, if I'm using less electricity to get more par, you're gonna put in less heat in the tank, well, possibly, but you're gonna be consuming less electricity to get the same punch. So it's kind of cool. Now again, this isn't all sunshine and roses. There is that one caveat that you are not getting as much spread. So as light bounces off the glass, you know, wrapping around the bottom of the coral and all the bases, like that is one of the massive benefits of the super wide spread, is how much light is wrapping around the coral. So this will not be quite as good for that. So it is a bit of a trade-off. But yeah, so far, I don't know, I think the tank looks pretty awesome with it. Caustic shimmer wise, I would say it is slightly more. It isn't night and day. It's not a huge difference, but it's a little bit more. All right, guys, I'm gonna leave it for a couple days, and then I will come back once I've had more time to stare at it and ponder my thoughts. All right, guys, I've had the high intensity lens kit installed for about 4 days now, so kind of some thoughts on it. So initial thoughts, there's definitely less light spill outside of the tank, which I appreciate. Looking at the floor and stuff, you know, you'd see a lot more light on the walls and the floor before. It's definitely a lot more reduced now compared to what it was before. Now, for me, reducing all that light spill makes for a happier wife, and it's good to keep, you know, the blue lights out of the kids' eyes, so I think that's a win-win. Now that being said, I also do have my little 3D printed shades on there, or without them you'd still see the brightness from the lenses, because they are the hemispherical lenses. They do pop down a little bit, but with those it kind of hides and it works well. Now I also do have my lights mounted lower than most. If your lights are a bit higher, I mean, same thing, you would just increase the spread. So my spread will be slightly more reduced because I am closer to the water, so keep that in mind. Now comparing to the Gen 5, Gen 6, the regular lens kit, now that one definitely had more spread, and it most definitely had more even par. So those are things to consider. Now I have 5 XR30s in my tank, so I have a lot of cross cover from the lights. when I had the original Gen 5, Gen 6 lenses on there, I can run a par meter across the tank and my numbers are pretty much dead even. So it was a very impressively even blanket of light. Now with these, they're definitely a little more focused, and you will get higher par out of it, and it won't be quite as much spread. Like if I look under the bottom of the corals, you know, it is more shadowed. You have more of that dynamic contrast, which visually looks good. But for the health of the coral, more light wrapping around it was better. So that is a trade-off. For me, I'm okay making that trade-off for now. We'll see how things go, and we'll see how the corals do. Now, I also think I can get away with a little bit more just because of all the I have 5 XR30s. You know, I could probably get away with 3 of them on here, but so there's a lot of kind of cross-section from light, so that does for sure help. I've also noticed I've been getting less light or less algae on the glass because less light is hitting it. So not cleaning the glass as often is, you know, always a big win. So I'm pretty stoked for that one. Less light spill, that's obviously a big one. And one other kind of consideration is I turned down the intensity of the lights by about 25%. That, you know, is using 180, 200 less watts of power across 5 fixtures. So from an energy saving perspective, it does definitely consume less power. So that's pretty cool. Now the lenses are similar to what they had on the G4s. So if you have G4s, it kind of will give you that kind of reference on it. Again, they're still very good lenses, but they were not, you know, this perfect blanket of even par. They were a little more hot spotty, but they're still pretty awesome. And I feel that's kind of where this puts the lights now, is similar to the G4 spread. So hopefully that gives everyone a bit of an update on it. But overall, you know, I'm pretty happy with the upgrade. I think the corals, you know, the slightly more shimmer caustic-y look, I think it looks good. You know, obviously it still has the same color rendition and all the corals are looking pretty awesome underneath it. So overall, really happy from that front. So yeah, hopefully this helps anyone out if you're debating if you should get, you know, the high intensity par kit. If it's a frag tank, if your lights are mounted really high, you know, so you can get in the tank and play with your corals more, I think it makes a lot of sense to get it. For the average home tank, I would say if you have multiple fixtures and you have more spread than you need, and do you want to get rid of the light spill, then that's another case that makes a lot of sense. As always, guys, hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.